Howdy there, friends, family, adversaries, ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary folks. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Riley Constantine, and today we are reviewing The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which is the recent Marvel Studios series on Disney Plus that follows Captain America's two sidekicks as they grapple with events after Avengers Endgame. This should be a good episode, but two things before we begin. Firstly, this review will have spoilers later on in the video. I will give you plenty of warning beforehand, especially if you're still curious on wanting to watch the show. So eventually I will give a big old spoiler warning and give you plenty of time to back out if you want to. And secondly, this video will be discussing race. And I'm mentioning this because I'm a white lady and I can only do such a good job and not be awkward, but I'm gonna try my best. So just keep that in mind when I'm discussing these things. But regardless, this should be a good review. So without further ado, here we go. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier is an exercise in frustration. While this new Disney Plus Marvel show features all the fun, humor, and action you would associate with a Marvel Studios production, the series has many problems, mostly stemming from how the show doesn't exactly know what it wants to be, both narratively and thematically. Throughout its 6-episode run, the show tries to be an entertaining actioner, a humorous comedy, an insightful story about social justice, a story with moral ambiguity, and a fable about the inherently problematic nature of American identity. But The Falcon and the Winter Soldier never really excels at any of these things. Sure, it has some solid action, a good sense of humor, and can be entertaining, but the show unfortunately falls flat when it tries to have deeper meanings. Whenever it attempts to discuss race in America, the thorny reality that America benefits white men above all others, and the nuances of radical social movements, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier's execution is very muddied. Even though it has a few moments of depth, the show is very inconsistent, which honestly saddens me, especially seeing as the Captain America wing of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is one of my favorite aspects of this interconnected continuity. After all, Captain America, also known as Steve Rogers, is, in my opinion, one of Marvel's most inspirational superheroes. I adore his humble upbringing and origin. I love how he is the perfect representation of what every American should strive to become, and I think it's cool that a good man with a clear set of morality is the star hero rather than someone that is more cynical, which happens a lot in the Marvel universe. If anything, Steve Rogers truly is the embodiment of what America should be and what a noble hero is, and as a result, I can't help but view him as my favorite Avenger. And to bring this back to the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, that's why it breaks my heart to tell you that this series is such a damn mixed bag. Sure, it has solid action, some nice one-liners, and has some moments of insight, but overall the show regularly undermines its stronger elements and fails to be anything greater than the sum of its parts, which is just unfortunate. This is especially true narratively and thematically. The plot follows Anthony Mackie's Sam Wilson and Sebastian Stan's Bucky Barnes, i.e. the Falcon and the Winter Soldier's titular Falcon and Winter Soldier, who are two Avengers that are still dealing with the events after Avengers Endgame. In that film, their buddy Captain America decided to go into retirement and go back in time to spend the rest of his life with his love Peggy Carter, and returned to the present in order to give Sam Wilson his shield, signaling that Sam should take up the mantle of Captain America because he has the same kind spirit, heroism, and good nature that defined Steve Rogers' run as Captain America. But in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, however, Sam has doubts. Despite his heroic deeds as the high-flying Falcon, he believes he is unworthy of the honor of being Captain America, and thus gives the shield to the American government in order for them to hang in a museum as a monument, which is unfortunately a wish that the American government neglects when they hand the shield over to the picturesque military hero John Walker, who is played by Wyatt Russell, which, yes, definite relation there, so that he can be the new Captain America, which is a new revelation that neither Sam Wilson or the super soldier assassin Bucky Barnes take very well. Furthermore, the plot kicks further into motion when a terrorist organization called the Flag Smashers, yeah, it's a bad name, don't ask, plans a series of attacks protesting the mistreatment of people that didn't disappear after Thanos murdered half the universe when he snapped his jazzy fingers. In the show, the world's governments are planning a worldwide resolution legislation that would try and legally make the world go back to where it was prior to when Thanos went all snappy, which is problematic because these policies infringe on the rights of people who were not killed by Thanos a few years earlier. People like the Flag Smashers, who are now experiencing firsthand as to how those who returned from the dead are now seeing preferential treatment compared to survivors like themselves. And as a result, the Flag Smashers are agitated and ready for a fight. And to make matters worse, many members of the Flag Smashers, as led by their leader Carly, which, yeah, not the most intimidating name for a villain. She sounds as scary as Flo, but whatever. Are amped up on super soldier serum and plan to wreak havoc on the world until their demands for a more equitable world are met. So with that, Sam and Bucky team up with the new Captain America and Daniel Bruhl's Baron von Zemo, who was the main villain that caused the split between the Avengers and Captain America Civil War, in order to fight Carly and the rest of the super soldier amped Flag Smashers. Fun times. This plot has a lot of problems, but before we really dive into those details, let's discuss one of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier's better qualities. For one thing, the actors and the overall character development is good. Mackie is a natural presence, and the tension between him and Sebastian Stan's Winter Soldier character feels natural. The Winter Soldier himself faces a lot of his past demons. Carly is a very sympathetic villain. John Walker is an appropriately smug and detestable presence who has a very punchable face. Walker's sidekick in Clay Bennett's Battlestar acts as the new Captain America's voice of conscience. Carl Lumbly's Isaiah Bradley is thematically one of the show's most important and thematically rich characters, and Emily Van Camp's Sharon Carter is an interesting character for the first time in forever. But out of all the characters though, it is Daniel Bruhl's Baron von Zemo who steals the show. Despite being retconned hard into being a villainous, progressive-thinking Bruce Wayne, Zemo is the most entertaining character in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. He is eccentric, unpredictable, filled with memorable lines and actions, and his banter with Sam and Bucky is terrific and fits in well with the duo's dynamic. He is kind of awesome. Though regardless of which character we are talking about, all the character work is really good and complements the show's high-flying action sequences. They are all fun and exciting. It's just too bad that they couldn't be part of a better show. See, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier's problems have less to do with the characters, action, and how they're all set up, and more to do with how the show's narrative and themes are poorly cobbled together. If anything, the issue has more to do with presentation rather than the characters themselves. And in order to get really into these details, we must go into spoilers. So let's spoil away. Alright, this is your last warning. I'm about to spoil the shit out of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. You have been warned. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier tries to make an emphatic statement about race in America. It features a lead who grapples with his identity as a black man. It contemplates whether or not the white population of America would accept a black man as Captain America. It showcases a white official violently abusing the power of his station, and it features sympathetic antagonists who represent a social justice movement. And to be frank, all of these are very relatable themes in today's current environment. After all, we are a year out from a moment of social upheaval, and I'm not talking about the COVID pandemic or the new mascot of the Philadelphia Phillies. See, over the last year in America, there were scores of Black Lives Matter protests across the country. The protests were about how black folks were tired of discrimination, of being murdered by the police, and hoped to change the racist policies of this nation. It was a big deal, and in terms of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the show had all the pieces in place to accurately reflect this current reality and predicament on screen. I mean, there are a lot of similarities here. Sam Wilson battles with how the American government favors white men over him. John Walker is a white man who isn't fit to be in a position of authority, and the Flag Smashers have ideological parallels with the Black Lives Matter movement. And through it all, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier had the potential to be a show that met the moment. It had the opportunity to have its art mirror real-world events and make a powerful powerful and relevant statement about the intersection of racial and American identity. But unfortunately, it doesn't. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier sadly falls very short of its mark. Sure, the show has some good representation and good symbolism as Sam eventually gains the confidence to try and be Captain America, but nearly every aspect of the show is morally compromised in some fashion. For one thing, Sam is very much a centrist. He believes in fighting injustice, but doing so in the correct and pre-approved way, and that governments that are corrupt and complicit in committing discriminatory practices can be reasoned with via a well-made, powerful argument, as Sam tries to do on the last episode when the world's governments attempt to restrict the rights of those who weren't blipped from existence by Thanos, people like the Flag Smashers, people that thematically represent sympathetic progressive movements. See, from Sam's point of view, the Flag Smashers, and by extension real-life movements like Black Lives Matter, can win the fight against systemic discrimination if they were to cease their radical actions and try and convince the world's governments to empathize with them through the art of powerful dialogue, as if they had fully leveled up their Paragon speech stat in Mass Effect, or through linking their arms together like the Care Bears. Regardless, centrist bipartisan humanitarian dialogue alone isn't an avenue of change that reflects the civil unrest that we had last year. See, politicians and their supporters that enact discriminatory policies or perpetuate bigoted beliefs generally cannot be persuaded into enacting a more humane policy. It doesn't matter how logical or empathetically sound the argument is. Many people have harmful beliefs to their very core. Like, for example, recently the entire country told Georgia that its voter suppression law targets black communities, but the politicians in charge that wrote and passed the law didn't care. It didn't matter how much evidence there was that these laws were harmful. Georgia's politicians ignored it, and as a result, they perpetuate bigoted beliefs, which makes them inherently unreasonable, meaning that peaceful dialogue didn't change their minds, and by extension is not always the best way or only way to enact change. Sometimes radical action and mass civil unrest is the best way to improve the world as a whole, because it gains attention for a cause that would normally be ignored. And to bring this back to the main topic of this video, this centrist angle is what the Falcon and the Winter Soldier really gets wrong here, and it negatively impacts the story. Starting with Sam's centrist tendencies to play both sides, there is a clear problem with the framing of the Falcon and the Winter Soldier's narrative. In the earlier episodes, the show goes through painstaking efforts to portray Carly and the Flag Smashers as sympathetic antagonists, all while portraying the discriminatory government suits, and by extension the new Captain America, as being morally in the wrong, both in terms of their aversion to finding common ground with the Flag Smashers and in how they attempt to enact sweeping government policy that would infringe on the rights of people that weren't blipped by Thanos. But despite this moral disparity, Sam is stuck between the two. He simultaneously desires to establish constructive dialogue with the Flag Smashers, all while also fighting against them, and on the flip side, he views the government infringing on the rights of others and John Walker's increasingly hostile and abusive methods as being morally in the wrong, all while also still aligning with them when it is all said and done. And this is a problem. Sam attempts to straddle the line by trying to see the merits of both the freedom-fighting Flag Smashers alongside the value of the government and system he works for, all despite how that said government is enforcing harmful and discriminatory policies and employ operatives that are dangerous. But with Sam playing the both sides game, the show unintentionally designates both the Flag Smashers, which are a sympathetic group with similarities with progressive movements made up of folks who experience discrimination, and the government, i.e. the ones who perpetuate that said discrimination, as both being equally culpable, that they are on equal moral footing, which is just bullshit, mostly because the group inflicting bigotry and the one that's on the receiving end of that said bigotry should not be compared as both being equally in the wrong. Like, obviously, the people in power enacting harmful and malicious policy are far worse than the people who are rightfully rising up against them. And sure, the Flag Smashers' actions can be extreme, but that shouldn't really matter, because in terms of who has the more righteous cause, the folks being discriminated against are better people than a political system that actively inflicts harm on marginalized people. And if you say otherwise, you can kindly fuck off. Because the idea that both sides are equally in the right and in the wrong doesn't reflect reality. And while sure, the show manufactures reasons to make the Flag Smashers more villainous, the narrative didn't have to be framed this way. It did not need to make the side that's more morally righteous to be offset by villainous qualities, so it can still contrast with the inherently antagonistic US and world governments. If anything, the narrative didn't necessarily have to be constructed like this, but the Falcon and the Winter Soldier felt the need to equate these morally incomparable sides anyway, which honestly sucks and is a problem that gets even worse as the series goes on. In fact, let's be clear here, the show gets really bad at the end. Like, the season finale really shits the bed. And when I say shit the bed, I mean like a wet dog turd on a white bed sheet shit the bed. The ending is truly a turd to behold, where all these problems coalesce into a finale that is a big piece of shit. And the frustrating thing is that the show didn't have to end this badly. Even though the Falcon and the Winter Soldier concludes on an awful note, it had every opportunity to somewhat stick a landing and be salvageable. See, despite all my criticisms, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier did have the chance to pull off an interesting and nuanced narrative on some level. Sure, the entirety of the show is filled with eye-rolling, naive, trust that the system can be good, wrong thing, but as imperfect as the first 5 episodes are, the show did posit some interesting questions and ideas within its narrative. For one thing, John Walker is representative of America's problems with violent cops and corrupt government officials. Sam contemplates the symbolic nature of a black man taking the mantle of Captain America, and the progressive adjacent Flag Smashers have important needs about discrimination and prejudice that the world's governments must address rather than sweep under the rug. And with all of those things, the last episode had all the pieces in place to have an impactful and resonant story that invoked our feelings surrounding events in the real world. For a few examples of where the story could have gone, maybe Carly and the Flag Smashers could have been reasoned with, and they, alongside Sam and Bucky, could all find an effective way to combat the injustice they face, much like many sympathetic activists do in the real world. Maybe when the Flag Smashers show willingness to cooperate, John Walker enters the scene and tries to hurt them, and challenges Sam in a fight. Maybe the two battle, and Sam is victorious, proving to the world and to himself that he's the rightful Captain America. And if white Americans have a problem with that, maybe we should examine our internal biases as to why that bothers us. Whatever the case, there were a lot of places that this story could go and events could play out, and through that, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier had every opportunity to be bold, but the show just doesn't take it. In fact, the show's finale does everything wrong. The Flag Smashers are portrayed as the main antagonists in need of being dispatched. Some of them are even killed in comical fashion, all despite representing sympathetic progressive movements. John Walker, the man who should be the main antagonist, does a redeemable action, and the show tries to make him likable, all despite how he's the equivalent of a murderous cop. And Sam Wilson becomes Captain America, which on one hand is pretty cool because representation is good, but on the other hand, it is problematic because the show portrays him as a centrist Captain America, one who has faith that the system can save itself through honest-to-goodness dialogue, one who believes that bigoted policymakers can be persuaded into doing the right thing by a well-made argument, which, as we have described before, is nonsense. It is wishy-washy bullshit that doesn't reflect the reality of the politics of the last decade and the recent work done by progressive organizations. Hell, to be honest, this centrist worldview doesn't even reflect the spirit of the Captain America franchise as a whole. To be blunt, Steve Rogers in the Marvel Cinematic Universe wasn't a centrist. In the movies, he would do what he felt was morally right and commit radical action, often against the wishes of the US government and the adjacent agencies he worked for. In Captain America's Civil War, he fought SWAT teams, soldiers, and other Avengers in order to defend an innocent man framed for a crime. In Captain America the Winter Soldier, he fought and destroyed the spy agency SHIELD after learning it had been infiltrated by Hydra, aka the Nazis. And in Captain America the First Avenger, Cap directly disobeyed the US government, a country that was only using him as a propaganda piece so that he could use his super abilities, skills, and handsome chiseled jaw to fight the Nazis. If anything, Captain America is about fighting or rebelling against the political machinations of government institutions for misusing their power, even if the act of doing so is difficult. result. Yet, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier ultimately goes against this core franchisal thematic point by being a meandering centrist story that plays both sides and takes a far less radical approach, and as a result, I can't help but to feel as if The Falcon and the Winter Soldier is pulling its punches. The show ultimately wanders around playing the centrist angle and narratively and thematically plays things way too safe, and it does this on multiple fronts. Where John Walker should have been the main villain like the rogue cop that he is, the show tries to make him sympathetic. Where the Flag Smashers should have been the good guys fighting for a noble cause, they are portrayed as the main antagonistic force in needing of being dispatched. Where the Captain America series starred a hero that embodies what every American should aspire to be, the series presents the problematic America as it is. Instead of being bold, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier lacks focus. It aims high, but seldomly reaches its target. And honestly, that is the rub in this frustrating mess of a show. While there is undeniably fun to be had with the character interactions, the action, and seeing a black man take the mantle of Captain America, the story is a muddled, inconsistent mess that devalues every good potential plot point it could have embarked on, to the point that it is a very unsatisfying show when it is all said and done. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier all just coalesces into a big old nothing burger, which sucks because I like burgers. Big, juicy, medium rare burgers. And that's how I have decided to end this video. And with that, that was another video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like rating and subscribe to this channel. Ring the bell so that you're notified whenever I drop a new video. Also, consider donating to my Patreon page. And speaking of Patreon, I just want to thank my high tier patrons in David Devlin and Mom. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all.